Hey guys, Magna back here for some more Community Starcraft 2. Today's video is going to be regarding TvT scouting, and I'm sorry if my voice is a little loud. I'm trying to adjust this so it doesn't blow you guys out, but we're going to be looking at, in TvT, different methods of getting information as far as what your opponent is doing, and what little reads can turn into, and how you should be reacting to the stuff that you see, so that you can get advantage in otherwise in a matchup that you would have no natural advantage, considering you're both playing the same race. So, let's go ahead and jump into the game here, and we'll get some information, shall we? So what we're watching is Teja versus Alive. This is from WCS America, round 32 in Season 1. I would tell you the group number, but I honestly don't know. So, both these guys are going to be doing pretty normal stuff for TvT, but we're going to be examining the little reads that they make and the kind of ways that you can be doing the same things and getting information on your opponent. So you can just straight up counter them and be like, LOL, I win, and get them ladder points and continue to feel as an amazing boss as you possibly can. That doesn't make sense. So both these guys going not necessarily for Reaper right away. They're both going to make a Marine right away. This is kind of a precautionary measure. I guess it kind of pushes away the SCV scout, but it also gives you an extra unit just in case you do get into a Reaper battle. So both these guys are going to make a Marine first and deny the SCV. The Reaper's coming out right now for Teja, and the Reaper is going to be a really strong scouting tool throughout the game. Alive is not opting for Reapers right now. He's just instead going to be going for a command center on the low ground, whereas Teja is doing the same thing. But the advantage that Teja has is he will have information. And if you ever get into this situation where you need to micro against Marines like this, you have the luxury of being able to just walk away and walk in somewhere else and get the information that you want. So both players right now are pretty in the dark. They both know at least it's not something crazy like command center first, considering their SCVs both got in far enough to know that. But the Reaper is going to kill this Marine, and now it can kill the SCV on here, and he knows, for one, that this opponent is going for an expansion. So he can feel free to start making his tech of his own, which he's doing already, just a factory. Going to be getting into some Hellion production, which is very common in the early stage of this matchup. But secondarily, he needs to jump in here and figure out what the follow-up is for Alive. If there's like a double gas coming down, that can lead itself towards something like Banshee after expansion, which is fairly rare, but still does happen every once in a while. But this Reaper needs to be pretty smart about how he does this, because if he just walks into Marines and dies, then that's a total waste. So what he's doing now is he's trying to bait the Marines down here so he can get around them at some point and try to get into the base and figure out what's going on. So it looks like he's going to be microing that just a little bit, and now that the Marines are out of position, he can just walk in here and see exactly what's going on. He just decides not to, though, which is a little odd. If you were to get up here, he would have seen that there was actually Hellions making. But the fact that he saw these units coming out two at a time, he can start to put two and two together. I wanted to show this just as an example of, if you don't get ideal scouting information, you don't know everything that's going on, you can still make assumptions here. So what he's seen so far is he killed the first two Marines, and then a pair of Marines came out, and a second pair of Marines came out. So all that means is that he either has two barracks, which is really rare, or he's got a reactor on there, and he can expect something like a Hellion follow-up. And either way, no matter what he's doing, he should be totally fine against that, considering his build is going to be into Banshees shortly afterwards. So now Alive needs to make this assumption as well. Rather, not assumption, but he needs to figure out what's going on, because he's been defending this whole time, and he doesn't really have any idea of the production that's coming out of Teja right now. So we'll continue to fast forward here. And Alive is going to be in a lot of trouble if he doesn't identify that this is Banshee coming out. Assuming that it is, yeah, he does have the tech lab empty right now, so we can swap that on there. Assuming he does that anytime soon. There we go. So now, it looks like the Reaper did just jump in there for Teja while we were looking around. And he saw everything. So he sees, more importantly, an empty tech lab right here, so that could definitely signal Banshee of some sort. But he saw the Hellions out already on the reactor. And he needs to keep an eye on this to make sure that this isn't Banshee. The second thing he could do, and this is something that happens all the time in TvT, is just assume Banshee and make a Raven and a Viking, and it'll kill it no matter what. If not, that Raven and Viking are going to have utility later on anyway. You can put down auto turrets to defend against things like Hellions and Marines. You can land your Vikings, which is really good against Hellions. So there's a lot of different things you can do. But he does need to at least know that this is a threat right now. So if you're really worried about this empty tech lab and the starport being done being a threat, which we can tell right now that it's not, it shouldn't go into Banshee at all, I don't think, then he'll have to adjust for that back at home. So we'll see what kind of reactions he makes here. and he just goes for Banshee himself. So he's just going to basically say, even if you do go Banshee, which is exactly what's going on here, I'm confident that I can outdo you in this. And this is the same thing that Alive is doing that we were just talking about. He hasn't really scouted at all, but secondarily, he can just say, alright, well, I can figure there's probably going to be some type of play where the Raven's going to come into use, whether it's Marauders or Banshee is extremely common. Either way, the Raven's never going to be a bad play, so I'm just going to make a Raven, and I should be able to deal with this Banshee that I haven't even scouted yet. So I wanted to just kind of make an example of, in TvT, you can get into games where you just run your own build, and you just assume that it has all these different checks for different things that you might see. So if you're expecting to see a lot of Banshee, if you're expecting to see a lot of Marauders in the later stages of the game, getting this Raven out first is not a bad play at all. So he's just kind of saying, you know what, scouting isn't that important to me because this build is flexible enough to deal with everything pretty well. So both these players having very different approaches to kind of garnering information here from their opponents. Alive's just kind of doing it, and Teja is kind of doing it a little bit more reactively. More so, I think he's just making sure that there's nothing too wild going on here. Because if you were to see something like a second factory with a reactor and it was like 3 Hellions at a time, then you'd probably say, alright, my Banshees are probably not going to be that great. I should probably make a tank instead and try to deal with the huge amount of Hellions that are going to come at me, because, I mean, I can kill the Hellions with my Banshee, but that won't be enough. It'll just fry all my SCVs and all my Marines by the time that I'm able to deal with that. So Teja taking more of an active approach, being a little bit more diligent about following up on the information, whereas Alive's just kind of blindly doing whatever he was going to do in the first place. Now I should mention here, I have talked a lot about this in the past in TvT, but I think we should just say this now. The beginning stages of TvT, specifically from Alive's point of view, is you need to be prepared for all different options that might come out from your opponent. So the first option is going to be something like Proxy Reaper. If they make a lot of Reapers and just come up there and kill you, then that's bad. You need some kind of answer to that, which is going to be a lot of Marines or your own Reapers that can deal with that. Maybe a faster Hellion or something like that. So that's the first thing you really need to worry about. The second thing you need to worry about is Cloak Banshee, so you need to have an answer for that. So actually, let me step back really quickly and address the way that the Alive took care of that first situation. He ruled out Proxy Reaper by walking up to his opponent's base and scouting that there was nothing too crazy going on. He saw a Marine kill his SCV back here, which means that he's not going to have any barracks out on the map. So that was the first part of Alive, making sure it wasn't Proxy Reaper. So cool, that's fine. Second part, Cloak Banshee. We know that the answer to Cloak Banshee is going to be a Raven and a Viking, and that's exactly what he's got out right now. So he's safe from the second stage. The third stage is, what are you going to do about tanks? And even without even looking, he says, I know what I'm going to do about tanks. I'm just going to make my own. I'm going to get better position. And that's going to be my play for this. So Alive is doing that with very minimal scouting information, saying that as long as you know that those 3 threats in order are going to be the things you're going to have to worry about and counter, then you should be totally fine, assuming that you stay on what you're supposed to be doing here. Teja is kind of doing the same approach here. You'll notice that his first scout walked up here, verified that there was a barracks, so that couldn't be any proxy barracks for any Reapers or anything. Secondarily, for anything like Banshee, he has actually stayed on top of it and made sure that there's nothing too wild going to be coming out like that. And even if there was Banshee, he does have the capability to produce stuff to deal with that as well. He does have a Raven in queue right now, but he can just continue to scout in here, and if he sees a Raven from his opponent, then he knows that, well, there's probably no Banshee, considering that Raven's out really early. So, continuing to harass here, the next thing you want to be sure of and double check that Teja just did, very indirectly here, is what's the follow-up composition from here. The 2 main compositions that you're going to see are things like Marine Tank, and sometimes Vikings and Ravens and stuff to try and win the air battle. Secondarily, it could be something like mech. So he just basically walked in here and verified that this is bio, and back at Teja's base, he does have mech coming down, so Alive does need to verify this at some point, but he's being extremely greedy with his lack of scanning and figuring out what's going on here. So once you're kind of in the game of knowing what your composition is and what your opponent is doing, then you can start making the proper reads and reactions that you'll need to make as the game goes on. And this is kind of the stage of the game where, I mean, we know what both the opponents are going to be doing, and these 2 compositions match up really well with one another in the sense that they both have advantages and disadvantages. But for example, for Teja, considering you know that this is bio, and you may see things like medevacs and stuff start to get churned out as well, along with the tanks. You can start thinking about putting up turrets to prevent drops, making extra Vikings to try and deal with his Viking count that's going to come up, because one of the best ways to deal with mech is just to win the air battle and start to pick away at it with Banshees. So there's a lot of different things that Alive can, or rather Tasia can start to assume and kind of think about how the game is going to progress from that point, because he has that information. So outside of that first 3 stages of TvT, where you have to worry about Proxy Reaper, and then you have to worry about Cloak Banshee, and then you have to worry about tanks, we're kind of at that stage where that's kind of all been solved right now. And I mean, we're not really watching these 4 battles per se, but I guess we could just watch this battle, considering it's going to happen anyway, and show you the flexibility of this. This is Taja's answer to the tanks, and that is just dropping down point defense drones and surrounding it before they get a good chance to siege. So Taja's response to the tank threat is just to get on top of it before it becomes a problem. Winning the air battle is Alive right now, so he knows that right now he has not seen any Marines. So he should know by now that it is mech, and that's kind of what that poke was supposed to do as well. So because it is mech, he could start switching into things that he wouldn't have normally done, such as getting faster medevacs, maybe a second factory for tanks, considering he can hold his own position against the mech while being able to harass at the same time. A lot of different reads that Alive could be making based upon the composition that he's seeing. And again, you need to pay attention to stuff like this. There's no Marines out on the map here. You should know that this is mech from Taja right now. And Taja's pretty much already seen all Alive's production, so he should know that this is going to be something like Marine Tank, maybe some Marauders mixed in and stuff like that. So from this point, they both should have a really good idea on how the game is supposed to play out. The only other thing that you might want to consider as the game goes on is very deep late game TvT. You need to start scouting out for things like battlecruiser transitions, because if you don't scout those out and they just walk over your mech because you have like 50 tanks and nothing to answer the battlecruisers, and that's obviously really bad. So those are later game things, but from this point on, pretty much everything that you need to know can be answered by scans or through some type of aggression like medevacs or Hellion run-bys or something like that to see their composition. So you should really know the tools there and really know the transitions, but the first 10 or 11 minutes of the game are really the most important parts of scouting in this matchup. So go ahead and jump into a second replay that's a little different. Hopefully will offer a little bit of a different perspective, but for the most part, TvT is just really all about the first 3 stages of it and ruling out that those things are coming. So you want to check for the Proxy Reaper, you want to check for the Cloak Banshee, you want to have an answer for the tanks that are eventually going to be coming up, considering they're so good in this matchup. So it's things you need to really look out for. So this game is going to be Pult versus Illusion. Illusion is a North American Protoss. He's a North American Terran, obviously. He's really good. He's kind of on the cusp of breaking into really the high-tier tournaments and stuff like that. He's kind of the player that, you know, kind of sneaks into those, but is a little outmatched by these better Koreans. And we'll see what these better Koreans' response is to a situation like that. So both these guys doing really normal stuff here. Pult's going to go for a Reaper first, and he's going to try and get in here and figure out what's going on. And what's actually going on here is a gas first from Illusion. This is a very early gas, and this is going to indicate really fast Hellion play possibly, or really fast Banshee, and those are things that Pult needs to rule out right now. Again, both these guys scouting out for their opponents, and they're both going to know it's nothing proxied or anything crazy like that eventually, but the Reaper is going to be able to get out here and scout what's going on. And on 4-player maps like this, you won't see a lot of proxies because the only viable place to proxy is somewhere in the middle like this, and it's still pretty far away from your opponent's base. So Pult's going to get his Reaper up here, and notice that he sees the starport starting at this time. And if you really dig down into the information of TvT, you can start to time out everything that's possible by whatever time. He'll know by seeing the starport drop at about 4 minutes that it has to be gas first. So this is about the fastest Cloak Banshee you're possibly going to see. It'll very unlikely be something like a Hellion play, but that is something you need to keep in mind as well. So you do see that every once in a while, but typically with the Hellion play, you'll already see a reactor started. You won't see such a fast starport. So these are kind of things, and especially the second gas, this is a dead giveaway, this is going to be Banshees, but these are kind of things that you need to be able to piece together and say, okay, it's 4 minutes into the game, my Reaper just walked into his base, there's a starport and a second gas already on the way at 4 minutes. that has to be Cloak Banshee. So if I really want to counter this hard, what I'm going to do back at home is get my own Raven up, get my own turrets up, and just completely shut down this Banshee from doing anything at all. And secondarily, starting the command center at the same time is going to offer him a lot faster economy than Illusion. So we're going to see these scouting reads take place right now. He should have seen all of that. I think he got far enough to see the gas. No, he didn't actually. Maybe he's just assuming that it is because there's no reactor down. But either way, I mean, he should have a good idea as far as what's going on. So Polt, let's watch his reactions here, because this is going to be a direct response to what he's scouted so far with the Reaper. So right now it's going to be a couple of Marines just to make sure that he's safe from any sort of Hellion play. He can start a bunker down here to kind of divert the Hellions just in case he doesn't make a lot of Hellions and maybe drop them or something like that, do a little bit of a run by. A lot of different options here. You'll notice that Illusion is starting to scout as well, and he sees a fairly normal factory timing, noting that his starport is done by the time that Polt's factory is done. So he's way ahead on the tech right now, and he should know maybe if I get in there soon enough, my Banshee will be able to do some damage because I know the status of his right now. So here's Polt getting the starport down. He's producing a mine, which is really good if you can catch a Banshee with that, since it deals maybe like 90% of its damage, or 90% of its health worth of damage on one hit. So this is Polt's emergency reaction to this right now. He should be starting, yep, there's the engineering bay right now. So against Banshee, you can put a turret here, you can put a turret there, and you can put a turret over your production as well, just in case you start to lose a lot of Marines to Hellions or something like that. You won't just outright lose the game. So Polt is doing pretty much everything that you're supposed to be doing against this right now. And we should see the turret starting here in just a second. There's the one by the production, there's the one in the mineral line, and there should be another one in... Those are all the exact positions that I put over with my mouse. Just because you want to try and zone out the Banshee as much as possible, which we may talk about in later videos, but the idea is to put it a little bit more to the top left and a little bit more to the bottom right, just because Banshees are going to be flying in from here and from here more often than not. So the more zoning you can get with the positioning of the turrets, the better. So he's doing everything he's supposed to, getting a Viking out now. So the mine is going to be basically holding down against a lot of Hellion or Marine plays and stuff like that. And positioning in between here is going to mean that he'll be able to chase down the Banshee with the Vikings and his Marines. And he's also in here close enough to prevent any sort of drop play that could have been happening, just in case this was like a really hardcore metagame that Polt wasn't expecting. So Polt has every single base covered, and he is totally fine against pretty much everything. Now because this mine is positioned here, he knows that there's an attack coming up at the front. He can start to move his Marines down. He can start to bring his Viking down whenever that finishes, or wherever it went. It's flying over here trying to catch a Banshee. So yeah, Polt's in really great shape right now. And from Illusion's perspective, we have to start thinking about, okay, he's obviously going to be reacting really hard to my Cloak Banshee, considering he should have known it's on the way by now. So what are you going to do if you're reacting against Cloak Banshees? You're going to see stuff like Vikings, maybe a Raven every once in a while. But once that's kind of shut down, I need to have a really viable transition that's going to transition well into the later stages of the game. So second Banshee on the way. I don't know that if you got scouted that early that would be worth it all the time, but sometimes you can make it work. Either way, we're entering that phase of the game where both players need to start worrying about what they're going to do about tanks. So producing your own tanks is obviously always a good solution if you know what your opponent's doing. And we're also entering that stage of the game where you need to figure out what type of composition your opponent is going to be playing for the longer stages of the game. So one other thing that the Banshee can do kind of indirectly is scout and rescout what your opponent is doing as far as the composition, because you need to start making adjustments based upon if they're going mech or bio or whatever. We know now that Illusion is going for some sort of bio play, probably mixing in tanks, which is really normal, and Polt should know that pretty soon. And Polt's the type of player I think just will go Marine tank. He doesn't really play mech too often, but either way, both players will need to assure that here in the next little bit. One other thing that I probably should mention is that if you can't see this production line very well, and you can't see what buildings are coming up here, you can also make assumptions based upon what buildings they have here. So if they have like 2 engineering bays, and it's obvious it's going to be for bio, or if they have an armory really early, it's going to be for mech, or maybe very rarely for a Marine tank, but you can see if it's like double armory, then it's very obviously mech. So there's a lot of information you can glean just by seeing buildings that don't necessarily directly produce the units that you're going to see on the field, but that wouldn't make any sense to be there otherwise. So from this point on, all you really need to worry about is things like army positioning, and that's part of scouting, because if you get out of position and you die because of that, it's because you didn't have the map information that you want. So Holding the watchtower to see pushes coming out is a big deal. The scan just went down. We'll have to see who knows what now. This was Polt just verifying Illusion's later game plans. So you should see medevacs coming out now. Tanks coming out as well. Just going to be Marine tank with some medevacs. Really common stuff here. And this is the point where Polt can start to react. Of course, like we were talking about, Polt really does favor barracks play over mech play. So that's what we're seeing coming down now from Polt as well. So both players really should have a good idea as far as what's going on for the rest of the game. But outside of this, there's going to be a stage in the game where there's not really much point to muling because it's going to be all about army positioning. And you just need to use things like scans, maybe some flying units like Vikings or Ravens to figure out where their army is moving and where you can get yours in position to prevent them from getting too good a position on you or killing you in that way. So that's pretty much the remainder of the game, but once you get to this mid-game stage, about 10 or 11 minutes or so, is when you're going to know what your opponent wants to do for the longer stages of the game and start to react that way. And again, like I mentioned, we won't fast forward through this replay to wait for that to happen, but you do need to know if your opponent is starting to switch into something like a lot of Banshees or battle cruisers or Ravens or something like that, so you can start to react and not fall too far behind in that production level. Because if you ever get too far behind in things like battle cruisers and Ravens and Vikings and stuff, then you're just going to get run over. So you need to make sure you're following up on stuff like that. But Terran is so simple as far as scouting in the later stages of the game, you can just scan anytime. So I hope that at least gave you guys a good perspective on what you should be looking out for in TvT and the different types of information that you can glean. Not necessarily off of direct information, you know, seeing the building or seeing the units themselves, but rather seeing things that would indicate one way or the other. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll be back with more videos very soon, and we're going to start to get into more game-specific situations. So people that have been looking directly for help on like mech or how to deal with some Protoss composition, that'll be coming on the way soon. So look out for that, and I'll see you later.